Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to our grant writing workshop today. We are happy to welcome Lucy Deckard from Academic Research Funding Strategies back to give a presentation today. Lucy's no stranger to PV. She's given many presentations to us, which have been both informative and useful in learning how to pursue funding from different agencies and how to cultivate your research strategy. So join me in welcoming Lucy to give a talk today on pursuing USDA NIFA funding. Lucy?
All right, thank you, Kim. Thanks everybody for joining us. Just let me go ahead and share my screen, and everybody should be seeing the first slide. If you're not, let me know. And also I encourage you to go to the chat if you have any questions as we're going through this, and also there's a link to download this this presentation. So the slides have a lot of links in them. They're not very useful on the screen. So what you want to do is either now or make a note of this link later. You can just copy it off the chat and go to that's a Dropbox, and you can download the slides, as well as there's a lot of other material that might be helpful to you. Then you download the PowerPoint, put it in your computer, then open it up and put it in presentation mode, and you can click on the links. So this is just a link to our website. It's Academic Research Funding Strategies. If you want to know more about us, we focus particularly on helping faculty get funding to support their research at a lot of different funders. This is my email address. So if you do have any questions after the workshop that you wish you had asked or you were too shy to ask, feel free to email me. I'm always happy to answer questions. Okay, so we just have an hour, so this is going to be relatively high-level discussion of USDA, kind of for those of you who are maybe new to this. If you are not new to this and you have some experience with USDA, I would love it if you would kind of chime in with your experiences, because I think that's always helpful to everybody to kind of get some specifics. Anything that you learn from your experiences, any frustrations, any successes, those are all helpful to other people. So I hope you don't feel too shy to share your experience. Okay, so one of the big keys to success at USDA is to understand that USDA is a mission agency. So you may be used to National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health. They are all about the, kind of just pushing the field forward, understanding the science, right? Obviously, NIH is really focused on health, but still it's all about fundamental science. And there is plenty of fundamental science that gets funded out of USDA, but it has to serve USDA's mission. Okay, and so it's always really important to understand the mission of the agency. The only reason they fund research is to help them accomplish their mission and to serve their stakeholders, right? And so you always have to be sure you understand that. Also, understanding the particular program that you are within USDA that you are targeting. Basically, the program is basically the organizational unit that controls a pot of money that you're applying for a grant from. And so each program can have their own priorities, their own interests. USDA funds a lot of very diverse areas of research. So obviously, you're going to have a very different cultures depending on your area of research, different expectations. So it's almost like learning a different language. So you really do have to kind of focus in and figure out which parts of USDA are you applying to, and then what are the expectations? What kind of reviewers do you expect? All that kind of stuff. Okay. The other thing you want to do is talk to your national program leader, which is basically like your program officer, and in either your area or your areas of interest, and get to know them. And then you can also volunteer to review. So we're going to talk more about this, but these are, kind of, if you are trying to learn at USDA, remember, this is not just about writing a good proposal. It's about understanding the agency, understanding your part of the agency, becoming part of that community, and kind of getting to know those folks and letting those folks get to know you. So it is almost a, kind of a, a networking sort of situation. It is kind of a social endeavor in a lot of ways, just as you, kind of get to know your colleagues in your field. This is also something that you want to do in terms of getting to know the folks that surround the funder and the program that you're applying to. All right, okay. So what is USDA's mission? okay, to provide leadership on food, agricultural, natural resources, rural development, nutrition, and related issues based on sound public policy and best available science and efficient management. Okay, so this is again, you know, where you kind of, it becomes clear that USDA is a mission agency. A lot of what they do has nothing to do with science or with research. They only fund science and research because it will help them do these other things, right? So that is something you always want to keep in mind. Now, on the other hand, look, they have a lot of really wide interests: food, agriculture, natural resources, rural development, nutrition. All those are very broad. And so you do have a lot of opportunities there. But again, it all has to take a particular slant in order to really relate to the mission of USDA. And so you have to understand that when you're putting in your proposals. Okay, so USDA has a strategic plan. This is a link to that. It goes from 2018 to 2022. So it's helpful to read that again to kind of understand what people are, you know, what they're looking for. Okay, so their goals are, you know, ensure that they're doing they're efficient. So that's their internal thing, right? Maximizability of American ag producers to prosper by feeding and clothing the world. Okay, so ag, you can see that's one big stakeholder there. Promote American agricultural products and export. Facilitate rural prosperity. So again, rural communities are a big stakeholder here in economic development. Strengthen stewardship of private lands, okay, through technology and research. So, you know, definitely private landholders are another constituency, and provide all Americans access to safe, nutritious, and secure food supply. So obviously that's another constituency, all Americans and their, you know, basically their food supply. So all of those things, again, you know, will be more or less relevant depending on your area of research, but you want to make sure that you kind of connect what you're proposing to do to some of those big goals. All right, as with many federal agencies, they are huge, and it can be a little bit of a challenge to figure out where within that agency you should even be targeting and who you should be talking to and how to figure out who that person is. So with USDA, they are, you know, they have a Secretary of Agriculture, Deputy Secretary, so forth. They have all these units that basically do a lot of things that have nothing to do with research, or, you know, or they will use research, but they don't fund research. Okay, so rural development, farm and ag services, natural resources and environment, marketing, regulatory programs, and so forth. So I couldn't even fit them all in here. But within that, there is the Research, Education, and Economics REE unit. Okay, that is where you're, you know, kind of where you're going to be focusing mainly. Okay, so within that, you have the Agriculture Research Service. That is their intramural research arm. So many mission agencies, so USDA, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, they have their own researchers that are employees for that agency. Okay, and so for Department of Energy, that is the national labs. For USDA, that is the Agricultural Research Service. So it's good to get to know your colleagues who are doing similar research at the Ag Research Service whenever you're, you know, kind of thinking about pursuing funding from USDA. Okay, they also have the Economic Research Service, National Agricultural Statistics Service. These are all, again, you know, these are their own employees that, you know, provide all kinds of, you know, economic analysis, statistical analysis, so forth. But within that, they have the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. That's NIFA. Okay, NIFA then is where you're going to be housed, where the extramural funding is. So basically where they give grants to outside researchers. Okay, so within the NIFA, they have over 70 programs. Okay, so those are different, you know, kind of these are different organizations that actually have specific goals, specific things they're tasked with doing. Okay, so one of the big ones is AFRI, Agriculture and Food Research Initiative. Okay, but then there's also a Specialty Crops Initiative, a whole bunch more, which we'll talk about quickly in a minute. So these all have their, you know, funding opportunities that will come out, and these all will fund external grants. Okay, so again, within this big organization, NIFA, and then within that, there may be a lot of different programs. I'm going to focus a lot on AFRI, Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, just because that tends to be one of the big places that faculty go for funding, but that's not the only program. Okay, so how is NIFA organized? They have the Institute for Bioenergy, Climate and Environment, food production and sustainability, food safety and nutrition, youth, family, and community. Okay, and then there's a link here for so you can go into more detail and kind of dig down. So each of them has their divisions and so forth. So you can see, I'm not going to read this slide to you, but you can see that there's again a real broad range of topics that they're interested in. Okay, so you got bioenergy, you got animal systems, you've got nutrition, you've got family issues. So all of that will means that if you're a researcher, again, you kind of have to navigate what is it that I do, and then where within NIFA are they going to be interested in that. Okay. All right. So NIFA funds external grants. Okay. So they have various types of grants. They have non-competitive grants. These are sort of like formula grants. So that's not what you're interested in. Oh, well, non-competitive, they have formula grants, and then they have competitive grants. Okay. Those are the ones I'm going to talk about. These are the ones where you write a proposal, you get reviewed by your peers, you get a score and so forth, and then they decide whom to fund. So that's what I'm going to focus on here. There are these other, peer review, I'm sure it gets many of these other kinds of grants also, but this is what faculty usually use to fund their research. Okay. Now within that, you can have research projects, education projects, and extension projects, and a combination of those. So let's talk about that. Okay. So the project types are research, which is basically, I think probably scientific investigation and inquiry that generates new knowledge. You have education. So this could be classroom instruction. These are grants, projects where you improve classroom instruction, develop new classroom instruction, you do faculty development, you do curriculum development, all that kind of stuff. Okay. And then you have extension. So extension is outside the traditional classroom. So that's reaching out to the community, reaching out to a lot of times to younger students, K-12 students, 4-H, that kind of stuff, and as well as farmers and other stakeholders. Okay. So you can put in a project for research, for education, for extension. Not all, programs will fund all those projects, and we'll talk about how to figure that out, which ones will fund which types of projects. Or you can put in an integrated proposal. So where you have research, you have education, and you have extension. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, NIFA funds over 70 programs. Okay. And this is a link to where you can find a whole list of all those programs. Okay. Now within that, you've got emphasis area programs, so animal, pest management, specialty crop, and others. Okay. You have a loan repayment program, which isn't relevant to us, and you have the grant programs like the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative. Okay. All right, so AFRI is the flagship funding program. So the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative is a particular set of funding opportunities. And this is the one that many faculty will focus on, but is not the only one. As I mentioned earlier, there are those other ones, those special emphasis types of programs also. Okay, so within AFRI, you have standard grants, which support scientific, again, research, education, extension, and integrated. You have coordinated agricultural projects, CAPs, which are larger, usually multidisciplinary, millions of dollars. So you're moving up there as a larger, more complex proposals. You have grants to support scientific meetings, and you have food and agricultural science enhancement grants, phased grants, which you all, Prairie View, are eligible for, and those are to strengthen science capabilities, to build infrastructure to do science, and to compete for USDA funding. And I'll talk more about that in a minute here. Okay, so phase. These, Prairie View is eligible as an HBCU, and you're not on table 1. That's sort of, it's very complex to kind of read some of the rules for eligibility, and they kind of refer to stuff that's not actually in their documents, but you can find, this is a link to the table, which basically is all these universities that are very well funded, have a lot of federal funding for research, and Prairie View is not one of them. They are, and you're eligible as an HBCU. Okay, so that is one thing to keep in mind, is that you can go for this special flavor of grant. You can put in seed grants, you can put in equipment grants, sabbatical grants, and conference grants and so forth. And in addition, they have new investigator grants. So that might be something many of you might be interested in. So the new investigator standard grant, this you can read all about the eligibility, but the main thing is you have to be no more than 5 years out away from you finishing your postdoctoral work. Okay, so you have to be relatively early in your career. You have to not have already been well funded and so forth. Okay. And what happens here is if you put in your proposal as a new investigator, it's just a check mark, and they will consider funding you even if you don't have quite as good a score as would be normally required. So again, there's just a way to kind of give you a bit of a break because your early career, they want to help you get started. Okay. They also have new investigator seed grants. So it's basically putting in a seed grant as a phase seed grant, but as a new investigator. Okay, so again, you're going to be reviewed with the other phase seed grants, but you're not going to have quite as good a score. Okay, so what is a seed grant? A seed grant is for getting preliminary data. So again, this is really helpful for new investigators because sometimes you need that preliminary data to write a strong proposal, but where do you get the funding to get the preliminary data? Well, this is one way to do that. They have recently put up a lot of really good webinars that go into much more detail on this new investigator opportunities, and they go by office and by area. So if you are interested, I would suggest following this link and watching some of those webinars. Okay, now this is, again, for these kinds of big mission agency, one of the biggest challenges is just figuring out where to find information. So that's why I have a lot of links here. Okay, so to find the AFRI RFAs, you can go here. And then to find the core program RFAs, they're right here. And then the foundational program is right here. Okay, so again, but then there's also, like I said, these other sustainable ag systems, education and workforce development. So these are all RFAs, requests for application. These are the solicitations. So this is where they're giving you the information you need about what funding is available in what areas. Okay, and then what they've done recently in the last few years is they've actually pulled out a lot of the detailed instructions about how to write the proposal, and you will find that here under RFA resources. It's a little bit confusing. If you go to the link, which we have in the chat, and I'm going to put it up here again, you can download the, some of these things. So let me just go ahead and show you what the funding opportunity is for the foundational program. Okay. All right, so you can see the foundational and applied sciences. All right, and you can go in and then there's an overview here. Okay, and then you can go in and read a lot more about the actual program. So if you go, all right, here, view RFA. All right, so this is the foundational and applied science RFA for AFRI. Okay, and this is going to be for 2021 and 2022. A lot of the deadline, most of the deadlines have passed for 2021, but you can, this is going to be the same document for 2022. Okay, so you can see they discuss their priority areas, which I already talked about. Okay, and then they talk about all these different program areas. Okay, so this is where you can start to look to see, okay, where might I fit? This is again where they fund a lot of their fundamental research. So that is, a lot of times what faculty are interested in. This is not the only one, but this is one of the most, kind of common places you might look. So let's say if you say, oh, food safety and defense, I think that's where I'm interested in, right? I can see that was due May 27th was the deadline. Okay, and then they have another one coming up next year. Okay, so if I look at that, okay, it's August 25th in 2022. So maybe I'm going to want to look at that. And then I can go down here and actually, this one, unfortunately, they're not giving you the page number here. So you have to kind of go look. Okay, and then go find your program. Okay, and then within this, I can see I'm not going to go all the way down. And you can see, for example, if you were doing plant breeding for agricultural production, they tell you, okay, how much budget it is, the kinds of projects they fund: research and integrated projects. They don't fund just education. They don't fund just extension projects. They fund research and they fund education projects. So that means, integrated projects, okay? And then they talk about, and they only fund the integrated projects for innovation in genomic technology to accelerate breeding progress. Then they go through the types of grants, okay? So they standard grant, conference grant, phase, which we've talked about, okay? And then again, and then there's more detail here about what they're looking for, their description of what they like, what they're interested in, and so forth, okay? So this means what you have to do is you want to look for your area, your particular program, and then really get to know those folks, or get to know what they're looking for. Read this, and then get to know these folks, your priority contacts. Basically, these are your program leaders, and they will tell you a lot more about what they're interested in. And you can also look and see what else has been funded. So this is sort of, the same process you would use with any funder. It's just exactly how you find this information is different for different agencies. And this is the way you do it for USDA. All right. So I think I've already talked about this. The priority areas for AFRI foundational and applied science: plant, animal health, food, safety, nutrition, bioenergy, agriculture systems, agricultural economics, rural communities, and then cross-cutting, which means things that are multidisciplinary. Okay, this is that link to the RFA, which I just showed you. And these are the instructions. That's a link to the instructions, which are also, you can download from the Dropbox. Okay. All right. So that was one example. As I said, there are other funding opportunities. You can go here to the grant search page and find and really search for what might work for you. And again, it may be in the foundational, RFA, or it may be elsewhere. The big thing is to read that RFA carefully, okay? And some of these RFAs, if you're getting away from the foundational program, they are going to be a lot more prescriptive. So the foundational is relatively open. They say, boy, we want to fund these kinds of things. It's up to you, sort of your best ideas. Whereas some of the other ones are going to be much more specific. We want A, we want B, we want C. If that's the case, you really have to kind of read that carefully, make sure you address everything they're asking for. And I'll give you an example in a little bit. Check to see if a letter of intent is required. For many of these funding opportunities, they require a letter of intent. If you miss that date, then you're kind of out of luck. Make sure that your idea really fits what they're looking for. Sometimes you have an idea of what you really want to do, and you don't want to try to fit that into a funding opportunity that doesn't really align with it, because it's just sort of a waste of your effort. It's a waste of the funder's effort. You've got to look for something that really fits. Okay. And then, not always is there going to be a perfect fit, in which case you're going to have to look for what are the gaps. They are asking for additional stuff. Maybe it's statistical stuff. Maybe they need genomic stuff or whatever. And you may have to kind of modify what you want to do and bring in some collaborators in your team if it's not too far from what you don't want to do. Okay, so all of that means you got to really be clear-eyed when you're looking at one of the funding opportunities, and make sure, particularly when they're very prescriptive, that what you want to do is also includes what they want you to do, that you don't kind of get too focused on what you want to do and forget the stuff that really doesn't overlap. Okay. All right, so if you are looking at one of these more prescriptive RFAs, remember that, these tend to be pretty big documents. That means, you need to really read through the whole thing. Obviously, you want to very quickly look and say, does this even align with what I'm doing? Am I even eligible? And so forth. But if you decide, yeah, I think this might be for me, this might fit what I want to, what I want to do, then go through, and a lot of times they will refer to outside reports and documents. You want to read those. Okay. Again, this is all about understanding where they're coming from, so you can connect what you want to do to where they're coming from. When they ask for certain things, they will tell you, we want you to talk about this. We want to talk about that. We want you to talk about this. Make sure you set up your outline for your narrative so that it mirrors what they're asking for in the order they're asking for it. Okay, a lot of times you'll have to go to the end of the RFA and they will say, well, how you're going to be graded, what the review criteria are. Make sure you look at that and then go back and put that into your outline. Okay, because sometimes these RFAs are not always as well written as they should be, and so sometimes your evaluation criterion isn't actually mentioned in your instructions. So you've got to make sure you're addressing what you're going to be graded on. And then go back through and start thinking about your page budget. So, okay, they're asking for this. Well, how many pages? What, how important is this? How much space do I need? And make sure you are giving enough detail in the areas that are most important and maybe most challenging. Okay, so this is just an example. This is, an older RFA, but just kind of an example of one of those more prescriptive RFAs. So this one was a biotechnology risk assessment research grants. Okay, and they asked for, they referred to the REE action plan, the NIFA strategic plan, the USDA advisory committee, report, the enhancing coexistence report. So this is all the stuff you would want to read, or one of the people on your team needs to read and report back what's in it, and that you can connect to and show in your proposal. Yeah, this is how we are responding to these various, kind of priorities or challenges that are identified, that kind of thing. Okay, then the outline, you start to look, okay, they ask for an introduction, and they tell you, they wanted you to say what your long-term goal is. And then the review criterion is, what is the appropriateness to regulation of biotechnology? Okay, that was at the end of the RFA. Now I came and put that up here because I need to connect my goal to regulation, right? A hypothesis and supporting objectives, some summary. Okay, here the review criterion was, explain the uniqueness and novelty. Okay, so I said, okay, I made myself a note. Right, this is where I need to make sure I address that very clearly. Okay, I'm going to use these words so the reviewer can see that, because I know their review sheet will basically have that as one of the grades they have to give you, is on uniqueness and novelty. So I want to very quickly up front say, this is how this is unique. Okay, same thing, preliminary data. I'm going to give an overview of my preliminary data up front, and then I'll go into more detail later. But that's because one of the review criteria was how the preliminary data demonstrates feasibility. So I want to at least make my argument. You can say, we have gotten this preliminary data which shows XYZ, demonstrating feasibility. So this is how you can start to kind of make sense of these really long RFAs that are more prescriptive. Okay, so if you're thinking about putting in an education or extension component as part of your either an integrated proposal or an extension or education proposal, you really want to think about, kind of how can you plan this so that it is rigorous. Okay, so just as your reviewers want to see rigor in your science, they want to see a really well thought education and extension component. Okay, so for integrated projects, okay, the research, they want to see what are the gaps in knowledge. For extension, they want to see how will you reach those who need the information. Have you really identified those folks? Have you talked about, do you have a clear plan? Do you have any experience doing this? Do you know what you're actually going to accomplish with this? Okay, for education, it's how will you train the next generation? Okay, so, who is it you're focusing on? What are you going to be teaching them? How is this going to prepare them to be the next generation of researchers or, or agricultural practitioners? Okay. All right, whenever you're thinking about this kind of education and outreach, be sure you think about, okay, actually, how will I do this? So the big mistake a lot of people make, particularly when they're writing these integrated proposals, is they put a lot of work into their research because that is where they're comfortable. This is what they've really want to do. Sort of that, showing that Venn diagram, right? You have the thing you want to do and you have the thing that your funder wants you to do, right? And so that's right in where they want it. They're researchers. They want to talk about their research. But remember, if you are including education and extension, you've got want to also put some planning and effort into that, and it should show in your proposal. You need to think through the details. You need to do the same kinds of things you would do with your research, okay? That means connecting to your stakeholders and or the people that you're educating and their needs, having clear goals and outcomes. So what is it you're trying to accomplish with this extension project or with this education project? Okay, and then how are you going to determine if you were successful? Do you have measurable outcomes? Okay, think through the logistics. So again, a lot of times their mistake here is that they're very vague. I will go talk to 4-H about X. Well, how, where, which 4-H, how many times are you going to do it? What are you trying to accomplish by that? What is it that you think that they will, how will they benefit? When will you do what? That is the sort of thing you would put in your research project. You want to put that in your education and extension also. Okay. Remember that there's already a lot of stuff at Prairie View that you can probably leverage, a lot of activity, and that you can, that you can deal with extension, with education. So you don't have to do everything yourself. That there is already, you can connect to ongoing programs and you leverage which the infrastructure that's already been built, and then you're going to be injecting maybe your research or the knowledge you're generating. Okay, and in general, think about seeking help if you are, again, moving kind of outside your comfort zone in terms of extension, education, just as you would with your research. If you're kind of moving into an area that's kind of outside your expertise, you would bring in a collaborator. Think about that, doing that for education and extension also. Has anybody written an integrated proposal? If you have, just put it in the chat or unmute yourself. Anybody? No? Okay. All right. So, is there anybody here who is already doing work in extension? Nobody? Okay. They're usually, and when I do these workshops in person at Prairie View, usually there's a few people who are already connected with extension. If not, talk to your research office. They can probably connect you with those folks. Okay. When you are thinking about outreach to stakeholders, okay, so this is where you want to think about who are your stakeholders for your research. Like, who is it that would use the products of your research? Who is it who would benefit from your research? And start to reach out to those folks. Think about, how can you communicate with them, but also how can they communicate with you? Right? This is something where this is not just you kind of holding forth about your research, and what you've learned. It is about you learning their needs, learning what their constraints are, and letting that inform your research. And a lot of times that is a much, kind of more accepted pattern. Reviewers tend to see this as a better way to do outreach to stakeholders. Okay. Also, think about how you might engage them. Okay, so in ways can they be actually involved in your research in some way, or at least how can you then kind of discuss with them what you're doing and make sure that you're getting that communication. And that might be by holding workshops, that kind of thing, or it may be through already ongoing programs and infrastructures I was mentioning earlier. So this is again where you have to really think about it from their point of view. Are they really going to want to come to a workshop if you're having one workshop in the whole state? Or would it be better to have a website? Or would it be better to work through your through the extension office? Okay, if it's appropriate, you want to get letters of support. And this is particularly true, let's say one of your stakeholders is maybe a company that makes farm equipment, or that is looking into robotics for agricultural work or something like that. Well, obviously this is where you definitely want to think about, okay, getting them involved, but also making it clear and supporting the your argument that you're going to be involved, you're going to be communicating with these folks and getting a letter of support. Okay, and then also think in general about how you're going to disseminate your results. And this is where, you know, particularly for mission agencies, they really, you know, they are serving these stakeholders. And if you just say, I am just going to publish in my regular journals, you know, for my field, that's not enough. Okay, they do really want you to reach out to the folks that they see as their stakeholders, and make sure that this is something where they're going to be aware of things that they don't have to go to your disciplinary journals. Now, obviously, this will vary a lot by the kind of research you're doing. If you're doing super fundamental research, maybe it's not appropriate for you to be doing workshops with farmers. But for some of you, you know, again, you have to think about who is it that's going to be your stakeholders, who is it is going to be interested in what you're doing, and then really think about how you can reach them and be more proactive than just publishing in a you know, in your regular you know, academic journals. Okay, and then think about, are there preferred models or tools to reach out? For example, for USDA, they have their portal extension, which they really like to see people use. There are other ways that they feel work better. This is something that you can learn from talking to your colleagues who've been well funded by USDA, talking to the program officer, and looking at what else has been funded. And a lot of times that will help you to see, okay, yeah, I see that they like it when people do these kinds of, you know, activities, and, you know, they tend to like it when they do a particular, you know, they use particular tools. All right, planning your research. Think about, you know, if you're doing especially integrated projects, you've got a lot to plan your research and your education and extension. So think about beginning early. This is going to be a team proposal usually, and you want to have time to really develop your ideas. We think about recruiting collaborators at the early stages, okay, and developing that relationship. One common mistake people make when they're bringing together a team, particularly if it's a new team, is, you know, they're wanting to do this all by email. And obviously with the pandemic and everything, you know, you may not want to all get in one room together, or it may not, you know, you may be distributed, you may not all be at Prairie View, but you definitely can at least use Zoom and discuss your ideas, allow room for you to educate each other and discuss things together. Don't try to just stitch together a proposal through what people send you via email. That is really not going to be a team project. It's going to look like a bunch of little projects that you stitch together. Okay. Then I've already said that. And then for education extension, you may want to think about developing a logic model. Okay, so this is especially important, you know, when you're talking about accomplishing a particular change or improvement, and then you want to have clear performance metrics and have a clear evaluation plan. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay. For education-focused proposals, remember the bar for dissemination is going to be a lot higher. If you're developing new curriculum, a new class, a new lab, something like that, they don't want to just pay for it just at Prairie View, right? They want whatever you develop to be, you know, kind of disseminated for others to use, other educators to use. Okay, so think about, okay, I'm going to do this new curriculum, this new educational approach. Now, how will others learn from this if it's successful, and how will they implement it? So a lot of times that means as you're developing the approach, really think about, you know, that kind of build that into your project. Think about, okay, who are the potential users of this new curriculum or this new approach, this new, you know, teaching software, whatever it is, right? And think about reaching out to them at the beginning, right? So that their needs and their constraints and the differences among maybe different institutions, different kinds of students, all that kind of stuff, you can kind of consider that as you're developing your educational intervention. You might want to consider hosting workshops for these potential educators, potential users of whatever it is you're developing. You may want to consider some sort of a beta testing, right? So where you're going out and seeing how well does this work, and then maybe, you know, modifying based on what you're finding. So you can, and you may want to like do iterative improvements. So you can see this is not just about, hey, I'm going to develop this and I'm just going to put it up on a website and let everybody come get it. This is about, you know, again, thinking about this from the point of dissemination. How is it that, you know, I am actually going to make sure this meets the needs of educators, and that it'll be used, and that it will be flexible enough for different kinds of institutions, different kinds of students. Okay. And then the key is, you know, basically, if you're talking about an education-focused proposal, you want to make the argument for impact, and usually that impact is really dependent on how well it's going to be disseminated. So that is another reason to really think about your dissemination plan. Okay, so if you are doing a logic model, okay, this is something that's very helpful for planning and evaluation, and it's typically used for sometimes not for fundamental research as much as maybe more applied research, and also for education and extension work. Okay, so what this does is it just is a good way to use it as a planning tool. You may put it in your proposal, and sometimes it's required in proposals. But even before that, start to think about, how you can use this to really determine what is the logic of your intervention or your new program. What is it you're going to be putting in? What activities are you going to do? And then how do those relate to what you're trying to accomplish? And how are you going to measure that you actually accomplished what you set out to do? Okay. So it's basically all about, does this make sense? Okay. So this is just an example of typical logic model components. They will vary, and different, programs will require different ways of putting together a logic model. But, a lot of times it starts with, okay, what's the challenge or opportunity? What are we going to invest in this? What are our specific activities? How do those relate to specific outputs and outcomes? Okay, so this is an example from just a generic logic model. You can see they have the situation, inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and then these outcomes usually need to be, the outputs needs to be concrete and the outcomes need to be measurable. Okay, and this is just another one. This is specialty crop initiative, research initiative, logic model. So if you are new to logic models and your proposal requires one or expects one, get somebody on your team who knows how to do logic models. This is a whole, kind of almost a discipline in itself, but it can be really powerful, and it really can help you both, kind of plan your project, make sure it makes sense to your team, and then also communicate to your reviewers why you're doing what you're doing and how you expect what you're doing to actually result in the outcomes that you are promising. Okay, there is also for NIFA, the Center of Excellence status. So this is sort of an add-on to your proposal. Okay, so they have special Center of Excellence criteria that you can address in addition to your research. Okay, and then if you request being considered as a Center of Excellence, the review panel will, if they rank you as highly meritorious, meaning they want to fund you, then they can look at that also. And if they say, yeah, you are a Center of Excellence, you actually get preference over maybe another proposal that had the same score, same good score, yet it wasn't a Center of Excellence. So it's just like a priority, kind of a category. And so if you are interested in that, this is a link to more the FAQs on Centers of Excellence. Okay. So for USDA, to be successful for USDA when you're writing your proposal, just remember, you need to get your reviewers excited. And how do you know what excites your reviewers? You do your research. Look at what has been funded out of a particular program. Talk to your colleagues out of that program. Talk to the program officer or the program leader. Okay. Make sure that your proposal is easy to read and understand. Don't get too much into the jargon. Again, this has to do with understanding your reviewers. Make sure, because a lot of times the panel can be relatively broad. And so you want to make sure that somebody does not have to be an expert in your particular subtopic to be able to understand your proposal. Okay. Make sure you discuss the literature and the state of the art. What is it that's already been done? What is already known? And then where are the gaps? What is it that you're adding to this? Okay, so that usually is an important part, and particularly for those foundational proposals, that is going to be an important, part of your argument for what you're actually going to accomplish. Okay, have a clear rationale and objectives, okay, that align with the program priorities. Okay, for research proposals, they usually want to see clearly stated hypotheses or research questions. And again, this is especially true for those foundational proposals to the foundational RFA. Do you have clear hypotheses, clear research questions that you will test or you will answer in this project. Okay, so this is all again about having that line of logic. This is what, you know, people know. This is what they don't know yet, or this is what we think but we haven't determined yet. This is what I'm going to do, and this is why it's important. This is what's going to come out of it. Okay, for education and extension proposals, have clear learning objectives, have clear expected outcomes and impacts for education and extension. Okay, so again, being very clear about what you're trying to do, not just saying we will do this activity, but why, what are you going to do, and what's going to come out of it? How am I going to determine if I was successful? Okay, for integrated proposals, this is, you know, you have a lot to cover here. So you have to have that, you know, kind of put all this together, have very clear objectives, methods, work plan for all of these components for research, education, and extension. Okay. Okay, so that is kind of going at a high level, you know, what you want to do in your proposal. I would suggest really, as you start to determine where you know, which part of NIFA or which part of, you know, of USDA you're approaching for funding, talk to your colleagues, see if you can get a successful proposal or a few to look at. Because, you know, again, it really varies a lot by your area, and, you know, talk to anybody who's been a reviewer for your program. Again, a lot of times your colleagues may have been, if they've been funded out of that program, they may have very well been reviewers. And, you know, each program is just very much a community. And so, you know, I've always been struck when I've talked to people, they go, oh yeah, well, I know that my particular panel likes X and they don't like Y. Right? And this can be very discipline specific, very topic specific. So this is part of really doing your research, so you understand what they're looking for. Okay, so you put in your proposal. How does it get reviewed? Okay, this is a panel review process. Okay, so if you're looking at, for example, the review criteria for AFRI for the research project, they're going to be looking at your scientific merit. Okay. How is this novel? How is it innovative? How is it original, right? So this is a key. You got to say what's different about what you're doing compared to other people, not just why is there a need, right? A lot of times there's need, and there are a lot of people working on that need, and they are going to be putting proposals in too, right? So you have to distinguish what's different about what you're doing compared to what your colleagues working on the same problem are doing. For if you have a model system, really talk about how were you transferring knowledge, you know, from that model system to important agricultural organisms. Again, keeping in mind what is the priority, what is it of your particular program. You know, how is what you're doing really, you know, how does the line of logic kind of hang together? Do you have clear objectives? Are your methods well discussed, well thought out, and feasible? Okay, a big part of feasibility is going to be, what have you already done? You know, basically in terms of what have you published in this area, or your team published? Do you have preliminary work that shows that this, you know, even has a chance of working? Okay, and then of course your probability of success. Okay, so that's what they're looking for in scientific merit. Then they're also looking at qualifications. So do you have the people you need to be successful? And if it's an integrated project, remember that means also your education and extension, not just the research. Okay, do you have the facilities? Do you have you know, if you have a big team, does the leader have some experience managing teams, right? And managing projects? And obviously relevance. Okay, so how relevant is this to U.S. agriculture? And again, look back at those priority areas. And for each of these, be sure and just state your argument very clearly. Okay, don't expect your reviewers to tease this out. For example, it may be very clear to you why something is relevant, but if you're doing really fundamental research, maybe you need to say, if we can figure this out, this is how it's going to help U.S. agriculture in this particular area, right? So just state your argument, then back it up. Don't expect your reviewers to kind of try to figure out how you are actually addressing particular review criteria. There is a list of all the review criteria, more details here in this link. Okay, and then this is one list for the integrated project. So that other one was research only, and you can see it goes into even more detail about stakeholder groups and audience and so forth. And I've already kind of discussed this, but again, it's a lot to cover. So this is where you have to kind of, start early, really think about all the components. How do they all fit together? And then, are you hitting all of these marks? Because this is how you're going to be graded. Okay, so the review process, those are the criteria. Okay, so who is actually going to be judging, though, whether you met those criteria and judging you on those criteria? Okay, this is going to be your peers. Okay, so it can be different for different programs, but you will have usually a panel manager, and then you will have the program leaders. Okay, sort of like program officers, right? Who select both panel members and ad hoc reviewers. So ad hoc reviewers are people who are brought in just because they're an expert in a particular topic where they have a proposal and maybe the panel doesn't feel they're qualified. So you may have a mix of those, and that can be, that means you have different audiences. So you want to kind of think about that. Your panel is probably going to be more broad, and your ad hoc reviewers may be experts more in your particular subfield. Then in the panel, the program leader will, or the panel manager will assign proposals to 3 or 4 reviewers, okay, out of the panel. So, okay, you guys, you have expertise in this here, you're going to get these proposals and so forth. So each reviewer is going to get between 12 and 20 proposals, okay, that they have to review, and then they bring those and discuss those with the to the panel, right? So they will review them, they write the reviews, and then they bring them to the panel. Okay, so then the panel will discuss the proposals when they all get together. Okay, the assigned reviewers will present the proposal and then their reviews. Then they will put you into into different categories: outstanding, high priority, medium priority, low priority, or do not fund. Okay. And then they will then give you a numerical ranking if you're in the top 50%. So if you're the bottom 50%, they're not going to bother because you really don't have a chance of getting funded. Top 50%, you'll get a numerical ranking. And then it will go to the, to the USDA staff, the AFRI staff, and they make the final decision. But usually they're pretty close to, what the numerical rankings are. But again, if you're a new investigator, you get a little bit of a break. If you're, there's other things that that may go into that decision. Okay. All right. So finally, the program leader or panel manager make the recommendation. Okay. And then, again, those strengthening funds, which includes the new investigator and in those other grants that we were talking about, the phase grants, you can get funded even if you fall a little bit below that funding line. Okay. All right. So you as a PI will get your panel summary, the individual reviews from those reviewers who assigned your proposal. And if you're in the top 50%, you'll get your ranking. Okay. So that is super helpful. And, this is where, you start to learn what they're looking for. So first time you put a proposal in, don't expect to get funded. This is, you're probably going to have to do this a few times really to learn, is this the right place? Am I actually even targeting the right program? Am I discussing what they're looking for? What do I need to do to really, kind of convince these reviewers that I'm the right person to do this and this is the right project to do? So think of these as kind of feedback that will help you then in your next, kind of iteration of writing this proposal. Okay, so what are the reasons that, kind of the common mistakes people make why your proposal might not be ranked as well? Okay, so most important here, it has to be relevant to the mission of USDA and to the particular program you're applying to. Okay, so again, got to do your research. If you don't have enough preliminary data or evidence that what you're doing is actually going to work, that's going to, that is going to be a problem. Not following directions, not writing it clearly, not having clear objectives or hypotheses, not having, again, a record of producing publications. Now, obviously, if you're early career, you're not necessarily going to have, the bar is not going to be as high for your publications, but you have to have some evidence that you can produce and that you have some expertise in the topic you're proposing. Does somebody have a question? Okay. Obviously, low scientific merit because they don't believe what you're proposing to do will actually accomplish what you say you're going to do, that kind of stuff. again, lack of hypotheses, research questions, learning objectives, not really being innovative enough. They really are looking for something that's different from what everybody else is proposing. So you got to think about, what is it you're doing that's different? Obviously you can't be totally out there. It has to be feasible, but there is that balance between proposing, something that, well, it's kind of routine, everybody's doing it, versus saying, okay, I have this new idea that I think will really make a difference. Okay, not describing your methods in enough detail, and then just this, kind of a nebulous criterion of just being exciting, right? And a lot of times that has to do with being, the way you write it, the way you frame your project can make a big difference in how exciting your proposal. You can take anything and make it boring. So this is where a lot of times grantsmanship will come into play. And we have a whole nother workshop on grantsmanship, but don't hide your great ideas under a bushel. Make sure you put them right up front. Make sure you're very explicit about what's interesting and exciting about your particular project, and make sure that you have a clear description of what's going to come out of your project. And a lot of times that will help your proposal be more exciting. And then, of course, if they feel like the person who the PI is not, qualified. Okay, so if you do not get funded, which let's face it, we all go through, right? Think about getting a successful proposal from a colleague, and you can do this before you put in a proposal too. So as I said earlier, look at abstracts of recently funded projects, really help you decide, okay, is this what they're looking for, or what is it they're looking for? Get your colleagues to look at your proposal and give you feedback. Ask, for a colleague for help with with both the research, education, and extension. So if you're doing an integrated proposal, don't just focus on the research. Remember, education and extension are also really important, and you can get colleagues who can help you with that also. And give you feedback if you got reviews back and they weren't very excited. Remember, there are people who have expertise in this area also. And then also they have these webinars from USDA that can go into more detail about what each program is looking for, and that can be very helpful also. Also consider being volunteering to be a reviewer for NIFA. So you can email this email address, put in a description, some keywords on your expertise, and volunteer to be a reviewer. And if you do get selected, you will learn so much. That can be super helpful, and you will learn a lot more about what reviewers are looking for, what kind of proposals review well, and just kind of approaching a proposal from the perspective of a reviewer will help you to write a better proposal. Okay, there are more NIFA resources, as I mentioned before. You can go to the Dropbox and you can get, there's more stuff I put up there, but and I think most of these are also up there, but here are links to more discussions of the peer review process, to general grant writing tips for USDA, and for special tips for integrated projects. Okay, does anybody have any questions? I know this is very high level, but hopefully, can at least serve as an orientation if you're new to USDA. If anybody has any questions, just put it in the chat.
You can put it in the chat, or you can go ahead and unmute and ask if you'd like.
Okay, I'm going to share this link again to download the slides. Okay. All right.
All right. Well, I guess if there are no questions, Lucy, thank you again for a very informative presentation. This has been recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. If you go to PVAMU research website, you'll be able to find it there. I'd also like to remind everybody that this is a bi-weekly session, and so October 13th, we will have one of Lucy's colleagues, Dr. Kate Kelly, come and talk about humanities funding. October 27th, we are going to have an NSF program officer. Chanda, what is her name?
That is Dr. Sally O'Connor.
And she's going to come and talk to us about Prairie View A&M having the designation of research undergrad institution, or primarily undergrad institution. Right now, given the amount of PhDs we give out in NSF related fields, we qualify for this funding classification, or it's a different type of, Chanda, help me out here, sorry.
As a primarily undergraduate institution, we are able to add some supplementary information to our NSF grants, to the NSF proposals. And so she's going to talk with us and provide some detailed information. And then, of course, we'll follow up with more information. But it's something we really don't want to miss. It's open to all faculty. And again, that is October 27th.
So, and then just one more plug for our weekly office hours. We are meeting via Zoom, and so you can email us or call us and get the link for the Zoom room and join us if you have any questions. I mean, we had someone who just popped in today who had a question about the form she needed for an NSF grant. So even if it's just something as simple as that, just pop in and say hi. So with that, is there anything else, Krish or Chanda?
No, thanks again, Lucy, for a very informative presentation, as always. Especially the reviewers' points of view should be very helpful to any investigator. And again, thanks for pointing out so many programs within USDA. Some of those are new to me as well. So it's a very good resource for all of us, your slide deck. And we look forward to your colleagues' third presentation 2 weeks from now. So thanks again.
Okay, thanks. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Have a great
Thank you.
afternoon,
Very
everyone.
good seminar.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everybody have a good day.